The one thing that we can say for sure about Lord Varys is that he's a sneaky, sneaky thing. I was gonna say sneaky, sneaky guy, but there's a decent portion of the fandom that thinks it's possible that he could actually be a woman. And I was gonna say then to cover my bases, he's a sneaky, sneaky person, but then I remembered there's a smaller portion of the fandom that seems to believe he might actually be a mermaid. So from the start, you can see that there's not much that we can say for sure about Lord Varys, and there are very few moments where we can really trust anything that he says, including things about himself. So what I wanted to do today is go through a bunch of the times where it seems that Lord Varys is either being honest or he has no reason to lie, or a few of the other times where people seem to take very seriously the things that he's told us about his life and backstory and what he wants, and try to get to the bottom of when he's telling the truth, when he's lying, what is his backstory to the extent we can figure it out, and what he actually does want. In terms of the conversations often talked about in the fandom as times where Varys would have no reason to lie, we have when he's overheard by Arya down in the bowels of the Red Keep talking to Illyrio, and also when he's talking to a dying Kevan Lannister in the epilogue of A Dance with Dragons. In one of these conversations, he's talking with his good friend and treason partner, so it seems like he would probably not be lying in that situation, not knowing that anyone's listening. And in the other situation, he's talking to someone who he knows is about to be dead. So, another situation where, on the surface at least, it seems like he doesn't really have much reason to be deceptive. In addition to this, we're going to go over a few times where he was talking to characters in ways that seem honest, at least honest enough where people treat what he says as a genuine part of his backstory, or things that were said about him that people treat as a genuine part of his backstory. And in addition to that, we actually have something from Conleth Hill that he was told by George R. R. Martin himself so that he could portray the character of Varys appropriately. So that might be one of the biggest clues in terms of, what's actually going on inside Varys's head. So the moment I'd like to start with is the one where he's talking to Tyrion about how he was cut, and I want to read what actually is said in the books to give a little bit of context as to this whole conversation. In the show, we know that this conversation is true because later on in the television show, Varys actually gets that wizard who cut his balls off delivered to him in a crate, pretty much confirming the story. But in the books, this does not happen, so we're left to wonder how much exactly of this tale is actually the truth. I'm starting with this one though, because I would say this is probably one of the things that's taken most seriously by the fandom about Varys' backstory, the entire idea that he hates magic because of how his balls were cut off. Many in the fandom would say that that is just like a part of Varys' backstory, and they don't really question it. He and Tyrion have interacted quite a bit at this point and have sort of been building up a relationship, as we'll see here as we go into this whole context, because it starts with Varys helping Tyrion try to figure out how to hide Shay. Varys suggests that she could basically be Lawless Stokeworth's bedmaid and help her out with things, thus giving her a reason to be around the Red Keep, and then she could go visit Tyrion. And then Tyrion says, "The Tower of the Hand is watched, you know as well as I. Cersei would be certain to grow curious if Lawless bedmaids started paying me calls. I might be able to slip the child into your bedchamber unseen. Shirtaya's is not the only house to boast a hidden door. A secret access to my chambers?" Tyrion was more annoyed than surprised. Why else would Maegor the Cruel had ordered the death of all the builders who had worked on the castle, except to preserve such secrets? Yes, I suppose there would be. Where would I find this door? In my solar? My bedchamber? My friend, you would not force me to reveal all my little secrets, would you? Henceforth think of them as our little secrets, Varys. Tyrion glanced up at the eunuch in his smelly mummer's garb. Assuming you are on my side. Can you doubt it? Why no, I trust you implicitly. A bitter laugh echoed off the shuttered windows. I trust you like one of my own blood, in truth. Now tell me how Courtney Penrose died. It is said he threw himself from a tower. Threw himself? No, I will not believe that. His guards saw no man enter his chambers, nor did they find any within afterward. Then the killer entered earlier and hid under the bed, Tyrion suggested. Or he climbed down from the roof on a rope. Perhaps the guards are lying. Who's to say they did not do the thing themselves? Doubtless you are right, my lord. His smug tone said otherwise. But you do not think so. How was it done, then? For a long moment Varys said nothing. The only sound was the stately clack of horseshoes on cobbles. Finally the eunuch cleared his throat. My lord, do you believe in the old powers? Magic, you mean? Tyrion said impatiently. Blood spells, curses, shape-shifting, those sorts of things? He snorted. Do you mean to suggest that Sir Courtney was magic to death? Sir Courtney had challenged Lord Stannis to single combat on the morning he died. I ask you, is this the act of a man lost to despair? Then there is the matter of Lord Renly's mysterious and most fortuitous murder. Even as his battle lines were forming up to sweep his brother from the field. The eunuch paused for a moment. My lord, you once asked me how it is that I was cut. I recall, said Tyrion. You did not want to talk of it. Nor do I, but... This pause was longer than the one before, and when Varys spoke again, his voice was different somehow. I was an orphan boy, apprenticed to a traveling folly. Our master owned a fat little cog, and we sailed up and down the narrow sea, performing in all the free cities, and from time to time in Old Town and King's Landing. One day at Mere, a certain man came to our folly. After the performance, he made an offer for me that my master found too tempting to refuse. I was in terror. I feared the man meant to use me as I heard men use small boys. But in truth, the only part of me he had need of was my manhood. He gave me a potion that made me powerless to move or speak, yet did nothing to dull my senses. With a long hooked blade, he sliced me root and stem, chanting all the while. I watched him burn my manly parts on a brazier. The flames turned blue, and I heard a voice answer his call, though I did not understand the words they spoke. The mummers had sailed by the time he was done with me. Once I had served his purpose, the man had no further interest in me, so he put me out. When I asked him what I should do now, he answered that he supposed I should die. Despite him, I resolved to live. I stole, and I sold what parts of my body still remained to me. Soon I was as good a thief as any in Mere, and when I was older I learned that often the contents of a man's letters are more valuable than the contents of his purse. Yet I still dream of that night, my lord. Not of the sorcerer or his blade, not even the way my manhood shriveled as it burned. I dream of the voice from the flames. Was it a god, a demon, some conjurer's trick? I could not tell you, and I know all the tricks. All that I can say for a certainty is that he called, and it answered. And since that day I have hated magic, and all those who practice it. If Lord Stannis is one such, I mean to see him dead. When he was done, they rode in silence for a time. Finally, Tyrion said, A harrowing tale, I'm sorry. The eunuch sighed. You are sorry, but you do not believe me. No, my lord, no need to apologize. I was drugged and in pain, and it was a very long time ago and far across the narrow sea. No doubt I dreamed that voice. I've told myself as much 1,000 times. I believe in steel and sword and gold coins and men's wits, said Tyrion. And I believe there were once dragons. I've seen their skulls after all. Let us hope that's the worst thing you ever see, my lord. On that we agree, Tyrion smiled. And for Sir Courtney's death, well, we know Stannis hired cell sales from the free cities. Perhaps he bought himself a skilled assassin as well. A very skilled assassin. I used to dream that one day I'd be rich enough to send the Faceless Man after my sweet sister. Regardless of how Sir Courtney died, said Varys, he is dead and the castle is fallen. Stannis is free to march. So there's a lot to take in there. First of all, it does seem very likely that, according to this conversation, Varys knows exactly how Renly and Courtney Penrose were killed, with shadow assassins. He seems to know a lot about magic, saying that he knows all of the tricks, and he believes in the old powers. If his story is true, then it would make sense that he might become a little bit obsessed with learning everything he can about magic to try and get some sort of answer as to what exactly happened to him. But if his story isn't true, it means that for some other reason he knows enough about magic to tell a convincing tale about what would happen if you had your balls sacrificed to a fire. We don't have any exactly similar stories that confirm that this is a thing that could happen, but it's close enough to Melisandre looking into the flames to get some sort of communication from the Red God, so on some level or another it does seem like Varys understands the workings of magic, at least to enough of an extent that he knows that it's magic that killed Sir Courtney and Renly. It also fits with the fact that sacrifice is what seems to power most magic in this universe, so feeding someone's balls to the fire, well, that would seem to, in the hands of a powerful sorcerer, be a way to potentially get some sort of communication with gods or demons or something from the flames. As I said, this is one of the stories from Varys' backstory that I think is taken the most seriously amongst the fandom. A lot of people, if you just straight up say Varys hates magic, they will believe you. But there are reasons that I feel like I sort of doubt this story. I'd say I'm pretty much 50-50 as to whether or not it's even true at all. We'll get into some more of the reasons that I feel like we should maybe not take this story entirely seriously after we've covered some of Varys' other backstory that's revealed at other points. But one of the things that I think is some important context for this entire moment is Stannis is coming to try and siege the city. And Varys is a very shifty little agent within the city, and I think it's very important to Varys that Tyrion trusts him, and he's trying to use this moment to build trust with Tyrion. Right before this conversation happens, Varys is talking to Tyrion about secrets, and he explains that there's secret ways into Tyrion's chamber, and Tyrion wants to know about them and literally goes as far as to say they're our secrets now, trying to establish this level of trust between the Hand and his spy master. But Varys doesn't reveal the secret that Tyrion actually wants to know, and instead deflects onto a different conversation. But in this conversation, I think he's telling Tyrion something that Tyrion will want to hear, which is that Varys has very good reason to hate Stannis. By telling this horrible story, Varys gives Tyrion a very good reason to suspect that he hates the guy who Tyrion also hates, so it's an enemy of my enemy situation, and he deflects from actually revealing the secret that Tyrion wanted the answer to. So yeah, Varys I think does a very good job here of building up trust with Tyrion because Tyrion after this story has no reason to suspect that Varys would ever betray him in favor of helping Stannis, which isn't actually something Varys wants to do anyway, but again, it's important if you're a shifty little dude inside of a city that's about to be sieged that the government doesn't think you're going to somehow underhandedly help the guy who's coming to take it over. Whether true or not, after Varys tells this story, it seems to work. Tyrion trusts that throughout the Battle of the Blackwater, Varys isn't going to be trying to somehow underhandedly support Stannis, and that's what Varys needs Tyrion to believe for this moment. Of course, later on, when a certain Targaryen or two come knocking on the door trying to take the Iron Throne, things will be a little bit different, and one of those Targaryens has dragons, so this whole complete aversion to magic and all who would practice it thing doesn't really add up, in my opinion, when you're trying to restore the magical Dragon Lord dynasty. But again, Varys is telling Tyrion, I think, what Tyrion needs to hear in this moment for him to trust Varys. So moving on now to another situation where I think oftentimes Varys' words are taken seriously by at least a portion of the fandom, but again, in my opinion, I think he is just telling the person he's talking to exactly what they would want to hear in order to trust Varys. This is when he's talking to Eddard down in the Black Cells, and we get the whole famous little bit about how he serves the realm, which is a thing that some people at least sort of take seriously, the idea that Varys is doing what he believes is best for the realm. From outside his cell came the rattle of iron chains. As the door creaked open, Ned put a hand to the damp wall and pushed himself toward the light. The glare of the torch made him squint. Food, he croaked. Wine, a voice answered. It was not the rat-faced man. This jailer was stouter and shorter, though he wore the same leather half-cape and spiked steel cap. Drink, Lord Eddard. He thrust a wineskin into Ned's hands. The voice was strangely familiar, yet it took Ned Stark a moment to place it. Varys? He said groggily when it came. He touched the man's face. I'm not dreaming this. You're here. The eunuch's plump cheeks were covered with a dark stubble of a beard. Ned felt the coarse hair with his fingers. Varys had transformed himself into a grizzled turnkey, reeking of sweat and sour wine. How did you... What sort of magician are you? A thirsty one, Varys said. Drink, my lord. Ned's hands fumbled at the skin. Is this the same poison they gave Robert? You wrong me, Varys said sadly. Truly no one loves a eunuch. Give me the skin. He drank, a trickle of red leaking from the corner of his plump mouth. Not the equal of the vintage you offered me the night of the tourney, but no more poisonous than most, he concluded, wiping his lips. Here. Ned tried to swallow. Dregs. He felt as though he were about to bring the wine back up. All men must swallow the sour with the sweet, high lords and eunuchs alike. Your hour has come, my lord. My daughters. The young girl escaped Sir Meryn and fled, Varys told him. I have not been able to find her, nor have the Lannisters. A kindness there. Our new king loves her not. Your older girl is still betrothed to Joffrey. Cersei keeps her close. She came to court a few days ago to plead that you be spared. A pity you couldn't have been there. You would have been touched. He leaned forward intently. I trust that you realize you are a dead man, Lord Eddard. The queen will not kill me, Ned said. His head swam. The wine was strong and it had been too long since he'd eaten. Cat holds her brother. The wrong brother, Varys sighed, and lost to her in any case. She let the imp slip through her fingers. I expect he's dead by now, somewhere in the mountains of the moon. If that's true, slit my throat and have done with it. He was dizzy from the wine, tired and heartsick. Your blood is the last thing I desire. Ned frowned. When they slaughtered my guard, you stood beside the queen and watched and said not a word. And I would again. I seem to recall that I was unarmed, unarmored, and surrounded by Lannister swords. The eunuch looked at him curiously, tilting his head. When I was a young boy, before I was cut, I traveled the world with a troop of mummers through the free cities. They taught me that each man has a role to play, in life as well as mummery. So it is at court. The king's justice must be fearsome, the master of coin must be frugal, and the lord commander of the king's guard must be valiant. And the master of whispers must be sly and obsequious, and without scruple. A courageous informer would be as useless as a cowardly knight. He took the wineskin back and drank. Ned studied the eunuch's face, searching for truth beneath the mummer's scars and false stubble. He tried some more wine. This time it went down easier. Can you free me from this pit? I could, but will I? No. Questions would be asked, and the answers would lead back to me. Ned had expected no more. You are blunt. A eunuch has no honor, and a spider does not enjoy the luxury of scruples, my lord. Would you at least consent to carry a message out for me? That would depend on the message. I will gladly provide you with paper and ink if you like, and when you have written what you will, I will take the letter and read it, and deliver it or not, as it best serves my own ends. Your own ends. What ends are those, Lord Varys? Peace, Varys replied without hesitation. If there was one soul in King's Landing who was truly desperate to keep Robert Baratheon alive, it was me. He sighed. For 15 years I protected him from his enemies, but I could not protect him from his friends. What strange fit of madness led you to tell the Queen that you had learned the truth of Joffrey's birth? The madness of mercy, Ned admitted. Ah, said Varys. To be sure, you are an honest and honorable man, Lord Eddard. Ofttimes I forget that. I have met so few of them in my life. He glanced around the cell. When I see what honesty and honor have won you, I understand why. Ned Stark laid his head back against the damp stone wall and closed his eyes. His leg was throbbing. The king's wine. Did you question Lancel? Oh, indeed. Cersei gave him the wineskins and told him it was Robert's favorite vintage. The eunuch shrugged. A hunter lives a perilous life. If the boar had not done for Robert, it would have been a fall from the horse, the bite of a wood adder, an arrow gone astray. The forest is an abattoir of the gods. It was not the wine that killed the king. It was your mercy. Ned had feared as much. Gods forgive me. If there are gods, Varys said, I expect they will. The queen would not have waited long in any case. Robert was becoming unruly, and she needed to be rid of him to free her hands to deal with his brothers. They are quite a pair, Stannis and Renly. The iron gauntlet and the silk glove. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. You have been foolish, my lord. You ought to have heeded Littlefinger when he urged you to support Joffrey's succession. How could you know of that? Varys smiled. I know. That's all that needs concern you. I also know that on the morrow, the Queen will pay you a visit. Slowly Ned raised his eyes. Why? Cersei is frightened of you, my lord, but she has other enemies she fears even more. Her beloved Jaime is fighting the River Lords even now. Lysa Arryn sits in the Eyrie, ringed in stone and steel, and there is no love lost between her and the Queen. In Dorne the Martells still brood on the murder of Princess Elia and her babes, and now your son marches down the neck with the northern host at his back. Robb is only a boy, Ned said aghast. A boy with an army, Varys said. Yet only a boy, as you say. The king's brothers are the ones giving Cersei sleepless nights. The Lord Stannis in particular. His claim is the true one. He is known for his prowess as a battle commander, and he is utterly without mercy. There is no creature on earth half so terrifying as a truly just man. No one knows what Stannis has been doing on Dragonstone, but I will wager you that he's gathered more swords than seashells. So here is Cersei's nightmare. While her father and brother spend their power battling the Starks and the Tullys, Lord Stannis will land, proclaim himself king, and lop off her son's curly blonde head. And her own in the bargain, though I truly believe she cares more about the boy. Stannis Baratheon is Robert's true heir, Ned said. The throne is his by rights. I would welcome his ascent. Varys tisked. Cersei will not want to hear that, I promise you. Stannis may win the throne, but only your rotting head will remain to cheer, unless you guard that tongue of yours. Sansa begged so sweetly, it would be a shame if you threw it all away. You are being given your life back, if you'll take it. Cersei is no fool. She knows a tame wolf is of more use to her than a dead one. You want me to serve the woman who murdered my king, butchered my men, and crippled my son? Ned's voice was thick with disbelief. I want you to serve the realm, Varys said. Tell the queen that you will confess your vile treason, command your son to lay down his sword and proclaim Joffrey as the true heir. Offer to denounce Stannis and Renly as faithless usurpers. Our green-eyed lioness knows that you are a man of honor. If you will give her the peace she needs and the time to deal with Stannis, and pledge to carry her secrets to your grave, I believe she will allow you to take the black and live out the rest of your days on the wall, with your brother and that base-born son of yours. The thought of Jon filled Ned with a sense of shame and sorrow too deep for words. If only he could see the boy again. Sit and talk with him. Pain shot through his broken leg beneath the filthy gray plaster of his cast. He winced, his fingers opening and closing helplessly. Is this your own scheme? He gasped out at Varys. Or are you in league with Littlefinger? That seemed to amuse the eunuch. I would sooner wed the black goat of Qohor. Littlefinger is the second most devious man in the Seven Kingdoms. Oh, I feed him choice whispers, sufficient so that he thinks I am his, just as I allow Cersei to believe I am hers, and just as you let me believe that you were mine. Tell me, Lord Varys, who do you truly serve? Varys smiled thinly. Why, the realm, my good lord. How could you ever doubt that? I swear it by my lost manhood. I serve the realm, and the realm needs peace. So there's a lot to unpack with this interaction as well, but I do think Ned really got to the heart of it at the end there. When Varys is talking about how he allows Littlefinger to believe that he's his and Cersei to believe that he's hers, and Ned says, just as you allowed me to believe that you were mine. I think that's roughly what Varys is doing in all these situations, right up into this very moment that we just read. He's getting Ned to believe whatever Ned is going to need to hear to believe that Varys is doing the right thing, and Varys establishes that Ned is an honest, honorable person, so he says that he's trying to serve the realm and do what's best for the small folk. This is exactly the type of thing that would make Ned Stark want to trust Lord Varys. Then on the very next page, they're talking about how Ned isn't willing to throw away his honor just to save his life, and Varys brings up, what about your daughter's life, my lord? And Ned says, just leave Sansa out of this, she's just a little child. And Varys replies, Rhaenys was a child too. Prince Rhaegar's daughter, a precious little thing, younger than your girls. She had a small black kitten she called Balerion. Did you know? I always wondered what happened to him. Rhaenys liked to pretend he was the true Balerion, the Black Dread of old. But I imagine the Lannisters taught her the difference between a kitten and a dragon quick enough the day they broke down her door. Varys gave a long, weary sigh. The sigh of a man who carried all the sadness of the world in a sack upon his shoulders. The High Septon once told me that, as we sin, so do we suffer. If that's true, Lord Eddard, tell me, why is it always the innocents who suffer most when you High Lords play your Game of Thrones? Ponder it if you would, while you wait upon the Queen, and spare a thought for this as well. The next visitor who calls upon you could bring you bread and cheese and the milk of the poppy for your pain, or he could bring you Sansa's head. The choice, my dear Lord Hand, is entirely yours. So, in that last little bit there, he sighs like he's feeling the sadness of the entire world upon his shoulders, and it does really seem like in this moment he has some genuine sadness over what happened to the Targaryens, or at the very least what happened to Rhaenys, who was a little child. Again, this could just be a play for sympathy because Ned has a little child who is now in the hands of the Lannisters, and this is the type of sympathy play he needs to make. And as we'll find out in another scene that we're going to cover in a little bit, Varys does some very bad things to children that make me think that maybe he's not the most, sympathetic to the idea that it is the innocents who suffer the most. He seems to be putting plenty of innocents through plenty of suffering to achieve his own ends. So, again, this does feel like maybe it is just a ploy here. But on the other hand, it could also be that he does harbor some genuine Targaryen loyalty, and the reason that he's sad is because this happened to the Targaryens, rather than that it happened to someone who was innocent. It's the type of thing that we'll have to look at deeper and keep in the back of your mind as we go through these other situations here. Something else that'll come up as being a little bit important later as well is that he does use the phrase Game of Thrones here to refer to this jostling for power that goes on between the High Lords. He isn't the only one to use the phrase, but it is something that he refers to as a game. Now, in terms of the core question of the entire situation here, I do think that it is possible still that Varys does believe he truly serves the realm, and that maybe there is a way that you can sort of mental gymnastics your way into thinking that everything he's doing is for the good of the realm. If he believes that the Targaryens are the ones who maintained a peaceful rule over the realm for hundreds of years, and a Targaryen restoration in the long run would be what's actually best for the realm and the small folk, well, then I guess you can sort of work your way into thinking that maybe, yeah, maybe Varys does truly believe that he serves the realm. We know because of a conversation that we're going to get to in a minute that he was trying to sort of stabilize the realm, at least for a short time, so that their plan can play out fully. But in the long run, he is planning for the realm to be taken over by a Targaryen restoration, so on one hand, he is plotting to overthrow the peace that currently stabilizes the realm, but on the other hand, he is trying to make that peace last a little bit longer until it can be overthrown at the proper moment. It could really come down to him believing this is for the greater good, and then it becomes a question of is this actually for the greater good, or is he wrong about that? Or it may not even be for the greater good, and maybe he has ulterior motives for supporting the Targaryens. Again, something maybe we'll figure out in future books for sure, but something to definitely keep in mind as we look at these next few conversations. Also, as we'll get to before the end of the video, it's probably more correct of me to say his support for the alleged Targaryens, and he's trying to lead an alleged Targaryen restoration. But as I said, more on that later. Something that I think lends a little bit more credence to the idea that, at least in Varys' own mind, he's doing what's right and he's trying to serve the realm in the long run is something that George R. R. Martin told Conleth Hill, which I teased at the beginning of the video, and now's probably a good time to bring it up. George told many of the actors for Game of Thrones little bits and pieces of the character's motivation that the audience may not know, but they would need to know to portray the character properly. And apparently, he sent Conleth Hill, who played Varys, an email, and he said that he couldn't reveal any of the details of it until after the show was over. But as it was summed up by Conleth Hill, the thing that he was told is that ultimately he is a good person. That reveal definitely paints some of the scenes that we've looked at here in a little bit of a different light. I think specifically the one there with Ned, but also when you take a look at some of the things, especially some of the things that we're going to be looking at coming up here that Varys has done throughout the series. Things like murders and cutting the tongues out of his little birds so that they can't blab their secrets to anyone but him. All this sort of stuff doesn't really line up with him being a truly good person, but considering we're talking about like character motivation and things like that, I would imagine what he's being told is that from Varys's point of view, ultimately he is trying to do good. So I do actually think we can take this somewhat seriously when he says it to Ned that he's trying to serve the realm and he's trying to do what he believes is good. But I would say I don't actually agree that ultimately he's a good person. But maybe from Varys's point of view he is, which is why Conleth Hill would need to know that and feel that way to portray the character properly. Let me know if you agree down in the comments that maybe this is how we square those two situations of George apparently saying that Varys is ultimately a good person and then squaring that with some of the things that he's revealed to do in the next scene we're going to take a look at. Before we move on, though, I do want to point out one thing that was a sort of common thread between both of these stories that he told to Ned and to Tyrion. The idea that before he was cut, he lived with a troop of mummers when he was a child. And at the very least, the idea of him living with mummers and learning to be an actor as a child is something that I definitely believe is a genuine true part of Varys' backstory. Not only do we have the consistency between the backstory that he gives in these two separate private conversations, but also just straight up he has a ton of skill as an actor, he knows all these mummers tricks. He's got these disguises down so well that he's fully created a separate identity of Rugen the jailer who has a bit of stubble who people don't recognize to be Lord Varys. So he's out there doing his thing, acting as several different people throughout the city, it would seem, And yeah, that definitely seems like it comes from being an actor and learning lots of Mummer's tricks when he was young. So this part of his backstory, I genuinely believe 100%. Okay, so those are two situations where Varys is directly giving information to POV characters that I think are taken with varying degrees of seriousness amongst the fandom. Some people believe that he believes he's working for the greater good, and I would say many people believe that he hates magic and was cut in roughly the nature that he describes there to Tyrion. Not everyone believes those things, but I would say they're common enough beliefs amongst the fandom that when you talk about Varys' motivations, they often come up. Now I want to move on to what I think most of the fandom would agree is the situation where he is the most likely throughout the entire series to be being completely 100% honest, and that is the conversation Arya overhears where he's talking to Illyrio down deep beneath the Red Keep. This is the time where Varys thinks he's alone, he thinks it's him and his best friend, his partner in crime, they're just chatting deep down below the keep in the tunnels where no one else will be able to hear them, and they're talking openly and directly about their plan, so there's really no reason for any subterfuge or deception to be going on here. This conversation is overheard when Arya is deep below the Red Keep chasing cats, and specifically chasing a one-eared black tomcat that has been around forever that is probably actually the cat that Varys was just referencing belonging to Rhaenys, Balerion the Black Dread, and so it's kind of a little bit of an interesting situation that this cat leads her to overhearing Varys and Illyrio sharing their plan. I'll resist going off on a tangent about how many different times throughout the course of this story we see weird little animal manipulation like this, where an interaction with an animal leads someone to doing something that ends up being somewhat important for the story. If you've seen a lot of my videos, you've heard me talk about all the things that I think are behind that and what's going on there. If you haven't and you're new here, make sure you hit like and subscribe because you've got a lot of cool videos to check out after this. But we'll move on to the conversation that Arya specifically overhears after she's been trying and failing to catch this black cat. Her fingers brushed against the rough, unfinished stone to her left. She followed the wall, her hand skimming along the surface, taking small gliding steps through the darkness. All halls lead somewhere. Where there's a way in, there's a way out. Fear cuts deeper than swords. Arya would not be afraid. It seemed as if she had been walking a long ways when the wall ended abruptly, and a draught of cold air blew past her cheek. Loose hairs stirred faintly against her skin. From somewhere far below she heard noises. The scrape of boots, the distant sound of voices. The flickering light brushed the wall ever so faintly, and she saw that she stood at the top of a great black well, a shaft 20 feet across plunging into the earth. Huge stones had been set into the curving walls as steps, circling down and down, dark as the steps to hell old Nan used to tell them of. And something was coming up out of the darkness, out of the bowels of the earth. Arya peered over the edge and felt the cold black breath on her face. Far below she saw the light of a single torch, small as the flame of a candle. Two men, she made out. Their shadows writhed against the side of the well, tall as giants. She could hear their voices echoing up the shaft. Found one bastard, one said. The rest will come soon. A day, 2 days, a fortnight. And when he learns the truth, what will he do? A second voice asked in the liquid accent of the free cities. The gods alone know, the first voice said. Arya could see a wisp of gray smoke drifting up off the torch, writhing like a snake as it rose. The fools tried to kill his son, and what's worse, they made a mummer's farce of it. And he's not a man to put that aside, I warn you. The wolf and the lion will soon be at each other's throats, whether we will it or no. Too soon, the voice with the accent complained. What good is war now? We are not ready. Delay. As well bid me to stop time. Do you take me for a wizard? The other chuckled. No less. Flames licked at the cold air, the tall shadows were almost on top of her. An instant later, the man holding the torch climbed into her sight, his companion beside him. Arya crept away from the well, dropped to her stomach, and flattened herself against the wall. She held her breath as the men reached the top of the steps. What would you have me do? Asked the torch-bearer, a stout man in a leather half-cape. Even in heavy boots, his feet seemed to glide soundlessly over the ground. A round, scarred face and a stubble of dark beard showed under his steel cap, and he wore mail over boiled leather, and a dirk and short sword at his belt. It seemed to Arya there was something oddly familiar about him. If one hand can die, why not a second? Replied the man with the accent and the forked yellow beard. You have danced this dance before, my friend. He was no one Arya had ever seen before, she was certain of it. Grossly fat, yet he seemed to walk lightly, carrying his weight on the balls of his feet as a water dancer might. His rings glimmered in the torchlight. red gold and pale silver, crusted with rubies, sapphires, slitted yellow tiger eyes. Every finger wore a ring. Some had two. Before is not now, and this hand is not the other, the scarred man said as they stepped out into the hall. Still as stone, Arya told herself, quiet as a shadow. Blinded by the blaze of their own torch, they did not see her pressed flat against the stone, only a few feet away. Perhaps so, the forked-beard replied, pausing to catch his breath after the long climb. Nonetheless, we must have time. The princess is with child. The Khal will not bestir himself until his son is born. You know how they are, these savages. The man with the torch pushed at something. Arya heard a deep rumbling. A huge slab of rock, red in the torchlight, slid down out of the ceiling with a resounding crash that almost made her cry out. Where the entry to the well had been was nothing but stone, solid and unbroken. If he does not bestir himself soon, it may be too late, the stout man in steel cap said. This is no longer a game for two players, if ever it was. Stannis Baratheon and Lysa Arryn have fled beyond my reach, and the whispers say they are gathering swords around them. The Knight of Flowers writes Highgarden, urging his lord father to send his sister to court. The girl is a maid of 14, sweet and beautiful and tractable. And Sir Renly and Sir Loras intend that Robert should wed her, and make a new queen. Littlefinger. The gods only know what game Littlefinger is playing. Yet Lord Stark's the one who troubles my sleep. He has the bastard, he has the book, and soon enough he'll have the truth. And now his wife has abducted Tyrion Lannister, thanks to Littlefinger's meddling. Lord Tywin will take that for an outrage, and Jaime has a queer affection for the imp. If the Lannisters move north, that will bring the Tullys in as well. Delay, you say. Make haste, I reply. Even the finest of jugglers cannot keep 100 balls in the air forever. You are more than a juggler, old friend. You are a true sorcerer. All I ask is that you work your magic a little while longer. They stared down the hall in the direction Arya had come, past the room with the monsters. What I can do, I will, the one with the torch said softly. I must have gold and another 50 birds. She let them get a long way ahead, then went creeping after them, quiet as a shadow. So many. The voices were fainter and the light dwindled ahead of her. The ones you need are hard to find. So young. To know their letters. Perhaps older. Not die so easily. No, the younger are safer. Treat them gently. If they kept their tongues. The risk. Okay, so there's a lot to talk about with this scene, and I would definitely agree this is the time that we see Varys at his most honest through the entire series. And we'll get to the plan in a moment, but the first thing that I want to just bring up is in relation to that whole backstory that he told about hating magic and all who practice it and having his balls cut off by a sorcerer. It strikes me as a little bit odd how they're like jokingly talking about Varys being a wizard in this situation. Like, okay, let's imagine one of your best friends has a horrible traumatic experience as a child with a clown that's left them scarred for life and so emotional about it that they hate all clowns to this day. It would be a little bit weird for you in private conversations to be referring to them as a clown or having themselves refer to them as a clown and like making little lighthearted jokes about it. It sort of just seems like the type of thing that you wouldn't do. I get that maybe some friendships are like that where you like poke fun at each other for little things, but not like the most traumatic experience that you've ever had in your life type of thing. I've never really run into a friendship that makes jokes about things like that regularly and so casually. Maybe Varys and Illyrio just have a really messed up sense of humor, and maybe this is how Varys deals with his PTSD about the situation, I guess. But at the same time, as I said, they are trying to bring back the magical dragon dynasty. So all these jokes about Varys being a wizard and a sorcerer, which he just kind of laughs off and plays along with, combined with the fact that they're trying to restore a magically powerful dynasty to the throne of Westeros, definitely makes me doubt this idea that he told Tyrion that he hates magic and all who practice it and has had this horrible traumatic experience with a sorcerer. I think that when you combine all of this with the fact that it just straight up would have been the thing Tyrion wanted to hear when someone who has a sorceress at his side is coming to try siege the city, I think Varys might have just made up this story to tell Tyrion so that Tyrion trusts him in the battle against Stannis. At this point, when I see Varys being against the idea of Stannis coming along and using magic to unite Westeros and take the Iron Throne, it's less because he hates magic and more because he's like, hey, no, wait, that's my plan. It would be a shame if someone else did my plan before me. So, yeah, that's how I take this, and I don't really trust the idea that Varys hates magic. The next thing that I want to bring up quickly is a line that I've seen people debating in this fandom basically since I entered it, which is what exactly is Varys saying when he says this is no longer a game for two players if ever it was? What is the game and who are the two players? I've seen people speculate, okay, well, there must be some other great schemer that he's talking about who is the other player. Maybe it's Littlefinger, maybe it's Doran Martell. There have been all sorts of different theories, but I think a lot of them are just overcomplicating this, and it actually, at least the way that I read it, is far simpler. The game that he's referring to is The Game of Thrones, the title of the book that this appears in, and the two players are basically their claimant who they're supporting and the current one who's actually on the throne and would take over next, which is Joffrey. In the conversation at the end of the book with Ned, he directly uses the phrase Game of Thrones, which I pointed out would be important later. And this is why I think when he's talking about this game, he's definitely referring to the Game of Thrones. And basically, if all of their plans are going off the way that they want it, it's really a game for two players. There's the Baratheon dynasty, which is currently in charge and people assume is going to continue to be in charge and they're the second unknown player to the Baratheon dynasty who's plotting to take over with Aegon. So, in all the years of plotting that they were doing, this was a game for two players, or potentially was, because they don't necessarily know if anyone else is out there secretly plotting, which is why he says if it ever was. But now it's devolving into no longer a game for two players. Stannis is gathering swords, Renly's gathering swords, Robb Stark is building an army up in the north, and the War of the Five Kings is about to break out. So, very directly, the Game of Thrones is no longer a game for two players, it's become at least a five-player game. Unless there's something I've completely missed, I would say this line makes complete sense in this context with the way that Varys is talking and what's going on in the books right now. And the game is the Game of Thrones, which is played between those on the throne and those who would seek to take it, meaning there were two players at least, and now there are going to be many more. Which brings us nicely on to Varys and Illyrio discussing their plan, which is obviously now in hindsight to crown Aegon Targaryen. But there's a little bit of a mystery here going on, and it's something that is once again debated within the fandom. Was Aegon part of George's plan as he was writing this in Book 1, or did he only come along into George's mind later? I'm personally a little bit up in the air on this idea myself. I could definitely see it being the case that when George planned this to be just a quick trilogy, Illyrio and Varys were genuinely going to be supporting Dany and Viserys, but then as the story grew, he decided it'd be more interesting if they were secretly supporting a cadet branch in Aegon. It's probably worth noting as well that the first mention of the Bright Flames, which was probably originally going to be the cadet branch that George had opposing the Targaryens before he came up with the idea for the Blackfires, well, the first mention of the Bright Flames comes in Clash of Kings pretty early on. So while it doesn't happen in A Game of Thrones, at the very least early on in Clash, it seems that George is working with the idea of this cadet branch of Targaryens, which means I think pretty early on he had this idea for a Aegon-like pretender. Whether or not the idea was fully formed, I don't really know. We also, of course, in A Clash of Kings, get Dany in the House of the Undying being told about the Mummer's dragon. So that is obviously a reference to the Aegon plot, Varys being the Mummer, Aegon being the Mummer's dragon. So at the very least, by book 2 in the series, he definitely had the Aegon plot in mind. There's another video on my channel which discusses George's original outline to the series, and in that video as well, I point out a few situations where it seems like he was going one direction in book 1, but by the time he's writing book 2, he has figured out a different direction to go, so I think there was a lot of work done on the series between book 1 and 2, and as I said, I'm up in the air as to whether or not the whole Aegon plot was known about from the very beginning, or was something that came into his mind as he was reworking several points from the original outline and just sort of reworking parts of the story as he was writing Clash. The thing about it, though, that I would say is most important is the fact that we have the gift of hindsight now, and we know that they're supporting Aegon, so we can look back at this conversation in that context, and I do still think it makes sense. They don't ever directly bring up Aegon, and they're talking about how they're not ready for war yet because the cow won't leave until his son is born and things like that, which definitely makes it seem like they are fully focused on Daenerys. But I would say the fandom overall has come to what I also agree is the correct conclusion about what their actual plan is in hindsight with all of the book knowledge that we have so far, which is the idea that essentially they recognize that Viserys would be a bad king, And I don't think they were necessarily thinking too much about Daenerys' part in this until she actually hatched the dragons. They expected her to just be more of a pawn to buy the Dothraki army. But basically, the plan seems to be Viserys, with a Dothraki army at his back, invades Westeros and creates all of this chaos that they were planning to eventually create, which allows Aegon, the perfectly raised young king, to swoop in, have a better claim than Viserys, and take the throne, save the people, and be welcomed as a beloved hero. This is why Illyrio is saying, delay, delay, what good is war now? We're not ready. Because they do want a war to tear apart the Seven Kingdoms and cause all this devastation, but they don't want it to happen until Aegon and the Golden Company are there ready to swoop in and clean up the entire mess and place their preferred claimant on the throne. This seems to be their grand play in the Game of Thrones, and it makes a lot of sense in the context of plotting this out before the War of the Five Kings breaks out because, well, Aegon can't just show up with the Golden Company in the middle of Robert's reign, which is going roughly pretty well for people. So they need a lot of chaos to happen right when Aegon's ready to swoop in, and that's what they, I think, were planning for with the Dothraki invasion with Daenerys and Viserys. The evil, unlikable Targaryen claimant coming in with an army of savages, helping to further destroy the realm at a time of chaos, only for Aegon to swoop in then to be welcomed as a hero. As I said, this is an idea that the fandom has roughly had figured out for a while now, over a decade, and I do think that it makes complete sense when you read everything in hindsight through this entire conversation that they could be supporting Aegon with this plan. And once again, just to be clear, that evil, unlikable candidate was supposed to be Viserys. I'm not saying Dany is evil or unlikable for those of you who are maybe going to get mad at me there in the comments. So even if George did garden in the idea of Aegon later on, it works out in hindsight for him because of how he wrote the original scene. Also, in this original scene, we are misled in a few ways just based on things that we know at this point as the reader and the things that they're saying. It sounds like they're talking about how Varys may have been involved in killing Jon Arryn, even though we know in hindsight that that's not true. But they're talking about how one hand died, why can't another? You've danced this dance before. And we as readers think that, like, oh, maybe he's talking about killing Ned and having killed Jon Arryn. But in hindsight, as I said, no, that's not the case. So there's a few different moments like this in this conversation where in book one, with the context we have at that point as readers, we draw a different conclusion than we would draw now in hindsight having a few more books. Given everything we've seen throughout five books, at this point it's clear to say that this is another one of those situations where we think they're talking about putting Dany or Viserys on the throne, but really they are in hindsight talking about Aegon. So that's why, as I said before, even though I'm a little up in the air as to whether or not he had the whole Aegon plot fully fleshed out at the point of writing this conversation, I don't necessarily think it's a big deal because it works either way. Another little interesting detail of this scene is the fact that Arya sees Varys in his Rugen disguise, which later on we'll see when he goes and meets with Ned, the same stubble, the same sort of jailer's uniform, and sneaking around down in the bowels of the Red Keep. That seems to be something that he just does whenever he's deep down in the tunnels. I've also seen it brought up as weird that Varys isn't described as having an accent, whereas Illyrio is described as having the accent of the Free Cities. If Varys is from the Free Cities originally and is talking in private to someone also from the Free Cities, maybe you would expect him to feel like he also has a bit of an accent, but at the same time, he has been living in Westeros and King's Landing long enough where maybe he's just lost the accent at this point. I think it is definitely something worth bringing up as we're trying to figure out what is actually true about Varys' backstory, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's like a definitive thing that proves he's lying about being from the Free Cities or anything like that. Now, as Varys and Illyrio are drifting off into the distance, Arya is only able to catch little bits and pieces of what they're saying, and them talking about how they cut the tongues out of the little birds is something that she just gets little pieces of. But I really do think that works against the idea that Varys is a good person on any real level. He may think he's doing good, but I think that one's pretty hard to justify under any circumstances. It's also a little bit weird if Varys is someone who had a body part cut off at a young age that he would turn around and do the same thing to all these little birds, but at the same time, that is sometimes how cycles of trauma play out, where someone who's had something horrible happen to them will do very similar horrible things to other people in their situation once they get the power to do so. It's not a good thing, but it is something that does seem to happen in real life, so I could see maybe this is something that Varys sort of views as just like, oh, well, this is just a thing that happened because it's something that roughly happened to him, even though it wasn't his tongue that got cut off. I'm not a therapist or a psychologist, so that's way above my pay grade to try and work out what sort of trauma Varys is dealing with and if it has anything to do with the way he treats his little birds, but it is something that I feel like was worth bringing up. So let's move on now to the next conversation that I want to take a look at to try and get some information about what's true about Varys' backstory. This next one is just a quick bit of the conversation between Tyrion and Illyrio after Varys has smuggled Tyrion across the Narrow Sea after the whole killing his dad, escaping from jail thing. So Tyrion's over there with Illyrio trying to figure out what exactly their plan is and what they're hoping to gain from all of this. Are you quite certain that Daenerys will make good her brother's promises? She will or she will not. Illyrio bit the egg in half. I told you, my little friend, not all that a man does is done for gain. Believe as you wish, but even fat old fools like me have friends and debts of affection to repay. Liar, thought Tyrion. There is something in this venture worth more to you than coin or castles. You meet so few men who value friendship over gold these days. Too true, the fat man said, deaf to the irony. How is it that the spider became so dear to you? We were young together, two green boys in Pentos. Varys came from Myr. So he did. I met him not long after he arrived, one step ahead of the slavers. By day he slept in the sewers, by night he prowled the rooftops like a cat. I was near as poor, bravo in soiled silks, living by my blade. Perhaps you chanced to glimpse the statue by my pool? Pytho Malinon carved that when I was 6 and 10. A lovely thing, though now I weep to see it. Age makes ruins of us all. I am still mourning for my nose. But Varys. In Myr he was a prince of thieves, until a rival thief informed on him. In Pentos his accent marked him, and once he was known for a eunuch he was despised and beaten. Why he chose me to protect him I may never know. But we came to an arrangement. Varys spied on lesser thieves and took their takings. I offered my help to their victims, promising to recover their valuables for a fee. Soon every man who had suffered a loss knew to come to me, whilst the city's footpads and cutpurses sought out Varys, half to slit his throat, the other half to sell him what they'd stolen. We both grew rich, and richer still when Varys trained his mice. In King's Landing he kept little birds. Mice we called them then. The older thieves were fools who thought no further than turning a night's plunder into wine. Varys preferred orphan boys and young girls. He chose the smallest ones, the ones who were quick and quiet, and taught them to climb walls and slip down chimneys. He taught them to read as well. We left the gold and gems for common thieves. Instead, our mice stole letters, ledgers, charts. Later, they would read them and leave them where they lay. Secrets are worth more than silver or sapphires, Varys claimed. Just so. I grew so respectable that a cousin of the Prince of Pentos let me wed his maiden daughter. Whilst whispers of a certain eunuch's talents crossed the narrow sea and reached the ears of a certain king. A very anxious king, who did not wholly trust his son, nor his wife, nor his hand. A friend of his youth who had grown arrogant and overproud. I do believe that you know the rest of this tale, is that not so? Much of it, Tyrion admitted. I see that you are somewhat more than a cheesemonger after all. So the first thing from this scene that I want to quickly bring up is, did Illyrio slip up here? Why did George draw our attention to the fact that he says they were young boys in Pentos, and then Tyrion has to correct him, saying Varys came from Myr? If Varys did actually come from Myr, then I think Illyrio could have just said that from the beginning, but George specifically has Illyrio not say that, and then Tyrion corrects him, and Illyrio is just like, so he did, and then goes right on with his story. But like, I don't know, the fact that George specifically had Illyrio say the other thing, then Tyrion correct him and Illyrio being like, "Oh yeah, you're right." That almost makes me wonder if this isn't part of just some sort of made up backstory and Illyrio didn't know that Tyrion had been told something that slightly contradicts it, and he's just good enough at lying where he's just like, "Oh yeah, Myr, yeah, Varys was from Myr. He came here just ahead of the slavers." And look, maybe slavers were after Varys once again after he became like a thief prince in Myr or whatever, as Illyrio says. But what Varys told Tyrion was that he was enslaved and then he was sold to a sorcerer who cut his balls off and then just dumped out on the street. So once he was sold and then basically freed because the guy had no more use for him, would the slavers have been after Varys once again? I don't know. If they were, it was probably something to do with the fact that he became like this big, well known thief, I guess. But it's just kind of a weird little situation where Illyrio says something, gets corrected, and then says he's coming to Pentos avoiding the slavers when Varys basically said, yeah, he was sold and then more or less freed. I don't really know. A lot of these little things feel like maybe there's some reason to doubt this story that Illyrio's telling is entirely true. Either that, or if it is true, perhaps some of the things that Varys told Tyrion earlier on are not exactly true, and Illyrio wasn't entirely up to date on exactly what Varys told Tyrion. It's also worth pointing out what Pycelle says about Varys' backstory to Ned in Book 1. When Ned says, I've heard it said that poison is a woman's weapon, Pycelle responds, it is said, women, cravens, and eunuchs. The Lord Varys was born a slave in Lys, did you know? Put not your trust in spiders, my lord. So we have him born a slave in Lys. We have Illyrio saying they were young together in Pentos, and Tyrion correcting him, saying Varys came from Myr, to which Illyrio responds, so he did. I suppose it's possible for someone to be born in one city and then spend enough time in their youth in multiple other cities where it feels like they're from a different city than where they were born, and then were also young in a third city. But is that what we're really supposed to take from these inconsistencies, or are we supposed to maybe doubt what we're being told about Varys' backstory a little bit here? It just feels like that little bit where Tyrion has to correct Illyrio about Varys' backstory is something that's meant to draw our attention to the fact that maybe not all of this is adding up. I'd love to hear all your thoughts on that down there in the comments, but I do generally think that at least parts of this story that Illyrio's telling to Tyrion here ring true. That they became influential and powerful and richer than they were by stealing secrets in a similar way to what Varys is doing now in King's Landing. It just seems that he has this talent and he had to have developed it somewhere, so I do think he and Illyrio were doing something very similar in the Free Cities. Basically, the same reason I believe him that he was working as a mummer for a while when he was a little kid and he learned how to act because, well, he's got a ton of acting skills and he can play all these different characters, so the proof is there, so that's why I trust him on these things. Another thing that's sort of interesting about this, and I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on this down in the comments, but why does he call them mice when in the Free Cities and change it to little birds once he's in King's Landing? It's just kind of a weird thing for them to bring up that there were two different names from them, and maybe there's some significance to that detail, but I'm not entirely sure. If you want to strap on your tinfoil hats, you could speculate that perhaps it's something to do with the fact that across Westeros, birds seemingly are used for magical spying purposes by wargs and greenseers and the children of the forest. I've talked about it in quite a few videos across the channel so far, but yeah, the children of the forest can and do easily warg into ravens, and we get a line where Bran is warging into a raven and he feels that there's a child of the forest in there with him. And he comes back and he asks Bloodraven, do all the birds have singers in them? And Bloodraven says all, because apparently the dead children of the forest spend their time in birds. So it could be the case that Varys, who may know plenty about magic, considering he was talking to Tyrion about magic earlier, seemingly knowing that shadow assassins killed Renly and Courtney Penrose, and claims that he knows all of the tricks, well, maybe he's more aware of this fact that birds are used as spies than most people would be, and he's calling his spies little birds as sort of a play on that. As I said, it sounds a little bit tinfoil at first, but by the end of this video, we'll get to a scene where it may become relevant that Varys may or may not know that birds can be used to spy in this way. So just put a pin in that and we'll talk about it a little bit later on. The other thing that's worth bringing up about Tyrion being over there talking to Illyrio is that they send Tyrion with Aegon to go meet Dany, and we get a little bit more information about what their plan actually seems to be. We talked before about what the original plan seemed to be, with Dany and Viserys invading with the Dothraki first, and then Aegon comes in to clean up the mess, but it seems that the plan changed once Dany hatched her dragons and Viserys died. At this point, it seems to be that Aegon and Daenerys are going to try take the throne together, at least according to Illyrio's plan, them getting married and Dany with her dragons, Aegon with the Golden Company. That would make a pretty powerful couple taking over the throne of the Seven Kingdoms and establishing a new Targaryen dynasty with a new set of dragons. Overall, I'd say, given the circumstances and how everything's played out, this is a pretty solid plan. There's a decent chance that this could have worked if Tyrion hadn't gotten involved in the plan and messed it all up. We also get Illyrio talking a little bit more about Daenerys and what he thought of her, at least in the beginning, And basically, he says, and I think he's probably being honest about this, that he didn't necessarily even expect her to survive the time with the Dothraki. I think this just gives us a little bit more confirmation that Dany was sort of an afterthought and just a bargaining chip to get the Dothraki linked up with Viserys, and the original plan was bad guy Viserys, who would be a bad king invading with a Dothraki army, and then good guy Aegon coming in and cleaning up the mess with the Golden Company. Now, the last conversation I'd like to take a look at is actually the last conversation of the last book that we have, at least until we get the Winds of Winter. So far, it is the final conversation that we've gotten in the series, that between Varys and Kevan as he kills him at the end of A Dance with Dragons epilogue. This comes right after Kevin's had a busy day with several meetings, and then also at the same time, the White Raven has arrived from the Citadel to signal that winter is here. Suddenly, as he's looking at the raven, a crossbow bolt bursts from his chest and knocks him down into a seat. He is understandably confused and he begins to wonder, wait a minute, was Cersei right? And he calls out, Tyrion, where? Thinking that maybe this has been Tyrion who was hiding in the walls or something like that and is now shooting him the same way that he shot Tywin. Tyrion, he called. Where? Far away, a half familiar voice replied. He stood in a pool of shadow by a bookcase, plump, pale-faced, round-shouldered, clutching a crossbow in soft powdered hands. Silk slippers swaddled his feet. Varys? The eunuch set the crossbow down. Sir Kevan, forgive me if you can. I bear you no ill will. This was not done from malice. It was for the realm. For the children. I have children. I have a wife. Oh, Dorna. Pain washed over him. He closed his eyes, opened them again. There are there are hundreds of Lannister guardsmen around this castle, but none in this room, thankfully. This pains me, my lord. You do not deserve to die alone on such a cold, dark night. There are many like you, good men in service to bad causes, but you are threatening to undo all the Queen's good work, to reconcile High Garden and Casterly Rock, bind the faith to your little king, unite the seven kingdoms under Tommen's rule. So a gust of wind blew up. Sir Kevan shivered violently. Are you cold, my lord? Asked Varys. Do forgive me. The Grand Maester befouled himself in dying, and the stink was so abominable that I thought I might choke. Sir Kevan tried to rise, but the strength had left him. He could not feel his legs. I thought a crossbow fitting. You shared so much with Lord Tywin, why not that? Your niece will think the Tyrells had you murdered, mayhaps with the connivance of the imp. The Tyrells will suspect her. Someone somewhere will find a way to blame the Dornishmen. Doubt, division, and mistrust will eat the very ground beneath your boy king, whilst Aegon raises his banner above Storm's End, and all the lords of the realm gather round him. Aegon? For a moment he did not understand. Then he remembered. A babe swaddled in a crimson cloak, the cloth stained with his blood and brains. Dead. He's dead. No. The eunuch's voice seemed deeper. He is here. Aegon has been shaped for rule since before he could walk. He is trained at arms as befits a knight to be, but that was not the end of his education. He reads and writes. He speaks several tongues. He has studied history and law and poetry. A septa has instructed him in the mysteries of the faith since he was old enough to understand them. He has lived with fisher folk, worked with his hands, swum in rivers and mended nets and learned to wash his own clothes at need. He can fish and cook and bind up a wound. He knows what it's like to be hungry, to be hunted, to be afraid. Tommen has been taught that kingship is his right. Aegon knows that kingship is his duty, that a king must put his people first, and live and rule for them. Kevan Lannister tried to cry out, to his guards, his wife, his brother, but the words would not come. Blood dribbled from his mouth. He shuddered violently. I am sorry. Varys wrung his hands. You are suffering, I know, yet here I stand going on like some silly old woman. Time to make an end of it. The eunuch pursed his lips and gave a little whistle. Sir Kevan was cold as ice, and every labored breath sent a fresh stab of pain through him. He glimpsed movement, heard the soft scuffing sound of slippered feet on stone. A child emerged from a pool of darkness. A pale boy in a ragged robe, no more than 9 or 10. Another rose up behind the Grand Maester's chair. The girl who had opened the door for him was there as well. They were all around him, half a dozen of them, white-faced children with dark eyes, boys and girls together, and in their hands, the daggers. So there we have Varys laying out his plan in the most detail that we've ever gotten it, just directly telling it to Kevan Lannister as he's about to die. This is the reason that so many people suspect Varys is just being completely honest in this conversation, because why would he lie to someone who's dying currently and isn't going to be able to tell anyone anything anyway? So it seems pretty straightforward then. The young boy is Aegon, who's been raised for kingship his entire life and is now coming to take his rightful throne. Except for many in the fandom believe that that is actually a lie. Aegon is actually a Blackfire. The reasons to believe this are pretty strong, but then that would mean that even in this moment, when Kevan Lannister lays dying, Varys is lying to him. He's lying about who Aegon is, and keeping up this charade even though this man he's talking to is about to be dead and won't be able to blab about it. So unless you believe that young Griff is genuinely the young baby Aegon Targaryen having been smuggled away by Varys before he was killed, well then that means that Varys is lying even in this conversation. So now it's time to quickly go over the Blackfire situation, and I'm going to explain this sort of from the ground level just because I know at least a portion of my viewers have only seen the show and haven't read the books yet. But basically what happens in the books, unlike in the television show, when Tyrion's being sent off to meet Dany, he's actually traveling with a character called Griff and Young Griff. Griff is posing as Young Griff's father, and Young Griff is actually supposed to be Aegon Targaryen. He believes that he was swapped out by Varys as a baby just before the Lannisters came in and killed Aegon and Rhaenys, so therefore the true Aegon Targaryen was smuggled away and reunited with Jon Connington, who was Rhaegar's best friend, and has been being raised to be a future king ever since. The Blackfires were a cadet branch of the Targaryens who descended from a bastard who was legitimized on the deathbed of a king called Aegon the Unworthy, and they view themselves as the legitimate rulers of Westeros, and they've spent basically their entire existence trying to take back the throne from the Targaryens. Their attempts at this would take the form of invasions that have been known to history as the Blackfire Rebellions. But those rebellions were all defeated, and the line of Blackfires died out in the male line. This is something that Illyrio brings up to Tyrion during his time before he sends him off with Griff and young Griff, but at the same time, he only specifies that the male line died out. And he's also spoken to Tyrion very fondly of his wife Sarah, who has died by this point, but he says how much he loves her, and when he was talking about placing Dany on the throne, he was talking about how he has debts of affection to repay. But remember, at this point, his plan is for Dany to take the throne married to this young Griff. The way that Illyrio's acting, talking about his beloved wife, and the way that he talks about Aegon, including giving him a gift of candied ginger and saying how much he always loved it, and the fact that he has boys' clothes laying around his house for Tyrion to wear while he's there, a lot of people think that it seems like maybe he helped raise young Griff, and this leads people to speculate that perhaps Sarah, his wife, could have been a Blackfire, making Aegon, if he is indeed their son, the last living Blackfire. This could mean that when Illyrio says he has debts of affection to repay, it could be a debt to his late wife Sarah, who was potentially a Blackfire, to try place their son, the last living male Blackfire, on the Iron Throne, which is what the family has always wanted. During the course of this video, I've looked back at the Tyrion chapters, his first few chapters of A Dance with Dragons, where he's staying at Illyrio's manse, and the Blackfire explanation does make the most sense of Illyrio's actions, at least in my opinion. I suppose it could be the case that he's just Illyrio's son without him being a Blackfire, but honestly I think that makes less sense given what happens with the Golden Company, which we'll talk about in a moment. But like, he has this strong affection for Aegon that seems undeniable. Right down to the last thing that Illyrio says before Tyrion leaves and goes to meet up with Griff and young Griff. It says, "Good fortune," Illyrio called after them. "Tell the boy I am sorry I will not be with him for his wedding. I will rejoin you in Westeros. That I swear by my sweet Sarah's hands." Which, in case I hadn't mentioned it earlier in the video, Sarah died of grayscale and he keeps her petrified hands in his room as like a keepsake because he loved her so deeply. So he's basically swearing by his dead wife that he will meet them again in Westeros, and he's talking about how sad he is that he can't be at the kid's wedding. This seems like he's very affectionate towards Aegon. along with many of the other things that have gone on throughout these chapters. The Blackfire explanation would also go a really long way to explaining the actions of the Golden Company and why they're supporting young Griff. Because their entire time, they've been basically designed to put a Blackfire on the throne. The company was founded by a Blackfire and has spent a good chunk of their existence fighting against the Targaryens, and never has fought for the Targaryens. And Tyrion even calls this out, saying why would they serve Aegon Targaryen? They were supporters of the Blackfires, and Illyrio points out that, well, the Blackfire line is dead in the male line, and red or black, a dragon is still a dragon, they just want to go home. Perhaps Illyrio is telling the truth here, and maybe they've decided finally, you know what, we don't really care who takes us home, we just want to get back to Westeros, because many of them are exiles from Westeros. But when you add up all of this information, there's just a lot of things that are pointing in the direction of Aegon actually secretly being a Blackfire who believes that he's Aegon Targaryen, and Varys talks about power residing where men believe it resides, so John Connington fully believes that this is Aegon Targaryen, which is why he's serving young Griff, and the Golden Company seems to fully believe that this is a Blackfire, which is why they're supporting the cause, and which one it actually is really up in the air. I personally believe it's a little bit more likely for him to be a Blackfire just given all of the evidence, but I do respect the case for either side, and if you believe that he is truly Aegon Targaryen, I do understand how you could come to that conclusion, and it may be true. The story that young Griff was told is that Varys quickly, once he realized the sack of King's Landing was happening, swapped a bottle of wine for a young blonde baby, and then swapped out the babies. So basically, he paid a poor peasant in Pisswater Bend a very expensive bottle of wine that he had never had before and really never had any hope of affording for one of his sons. And it was just the right age where he could swap the babies, and then when Gregor beat the baby against a wall, no one could tell the bloody mangled mess from the real Aegon. This hypothetical swapped out baby is known as the Pisswater Prince, and if Varys is indeed truly loyal to the Targaryen family, who knows, maybe this is something he would have done. He did allegedly try and tell the Mad King not to open his gates to Tywin Lannister, which is what allowed the sack of King's Landing to happen in the first place, so if he was trying to prevent the sack, maybe he did take action once he realized the Mad King was going to let Tywin in. Also, just to add another point of evidence that the Golden Company believes that Aegon is a Blackfire, when Tyrion's talking about how expensive they would be to hire to support Aegon, Magister Illyrio says, some contracts are written ink, and some in blood. I say no more. Which definitely implies the Golden Company thinks that Aegon is a Blackfire because that is the contract written blood. The blood of the Blackfires is what founded the company, and their goal is to return to Westeros, put a Blackfire on the throne, and then they all get to live in Westeros and no longer be exiles. I haven't run an official poll on this, but I would say over my time in the fandom, it is probably a more common belief that Aegon is secretly a Blackfire than that he's the true Aegon Targaryen. But many people who believe he's the true Aegon point to this scene where Varys is talking to a dying Kevan Lannister and wonder, okay, why would he lie? Why wouldn't he just say, yeah, he's a Blackfire? Haha, the Blackfires are taking over, our secret plan is coming to fruition. It seems like nothing Varys says to Kevin is going to leave that room anyway, so what would be the point of pretending? I think there are several good reasons, though, that you could explain away why Varys would lie to Kevin Lannister even though he doesn't expect Kevin to make it out of this room and tell anyone. First of all, the most obvious one is that his little birds are still around to hear this, and he probably wants them to grow up believing the lie that Aegon is actually secretly a Targaryen, just so that he doesn't have to, silence all of the loose ends and kill a bunch of his spies. Granted, we don't know what Varys does with his little birds when they grow up anyway, so maybe he is going to be killing them in the future anyway. I'm not really trying to speculate about that here. But as I said, there are witnesses to this conversation that Varys knows can hear him. Second of all, Varys knows as well as anybody that all of the castle has secret passages running everywhere, and there could potentially even be other people spying on this conversation Varys isn't aware of. So, what better way to make a good show of things than to lie in a situation where spies would fully not expect you to lie? And this idea seems to be demonstrated by the fact that so many people in the fandom think that it doesn't make sense for Varys to lie in this situation. If you were sitting inside the walls overhearing this conversation and hearing him talking to someone who's about to be dead, you would probably think the exact same thing that many in the fandom do. So if anyone does happen to be spying on this conversation that Varys isn't aware of, it's very good cover for him to lie in the way that he does. And then, if you want to get the most tinfoil explanation, but one that I don't discount at all, I think this is actually a fairly reasonable possibility, there is the whole matter of that raven. And if Varys is aware of magic at all, he could definitely be aware that ravens can be warged, and depending on how aware of magic he is, he could know that the former person who used to be in his job, Master of Whispers, was a guy named Bloodraven who was very dedicated to killing Blackfires and making sure that they don't end up on the throne. And while it is perhaps a bit far-fetched for Varys to be aware of the fact that Bloodraven is still out there alive and spying on things through birds and things like that, I don't discount that idea entirely. So there have been people who have speculated, and I think it's a reasonable speculation, Varys could be lying to Bloodraven here. He could be lying to the guy who has ended other Blackfire's lives, hoping that he believes that this is truly a Targaryen, and therefore won't interfere to stop all of this. Let's remember that this is a guy when he's talking about how Renly and Courtney Penrose were killed to Tyrion, he says, "Do you believe in the old powers?" And therefore seemingly knows that this was a shadow assassination, so he does know quite a bit about magic, at least compared to the average character in these books. I wouldn't discount entirely that combined with the fact that he names his spies little birds, may be hinting at the fact that he is on some level aware not to trust birds. There have been people who have even speculated Varys himself may be a warg, and that could be how he gets so much of this information, but from everything that I've seen, I don't really see any evidence of that. I think that he's just got an extensive network of his own human little birds, and he's hanging around in the secret passages inside the walls all day, eavesdropping and doing exactly what Illyrio says, having his little birds look at letters, write down their contents, and leave them where they lay, so that nobody knows how often they're being spied on. Now, there are a couple other little theories about Varys that I want to just quickly give my opinion on before we end this whole big Varys investigation. And one of them is the idea that rather than being a eunuch, what if Varys is actually secretly a woman? This is something people have speculated on, but I don't personally buy, mostly because of this last scene here that we just took a look at. When Varys is talking to Kevan here, at one point in the conversation, his voice gets deeper. So when Varys is sort of dropping the act a little bit right before Kevin's about to die, his voice gets deeper. If he was a woman, you wouldn't necessarily expect that to happen. And actually, the fact that his eunuch voice may even be one of his acting roles that he's just playing, I tend to think it's more likely, in fact, that he is not a eunuch, that he actually has his balls, than that he's secretly a woman. I've already talked earlier on in the video about why I definitely have some doubts, at least about the story he told Tyrion about how his balls were cut off. So maybe the whole thing is just sort of a lie and part of an act. Maybe he still has his balls, and the character of Varys the Eunuch is as true to who he is as Rugen the Jailer, which is to say, not really at all. This character that we've come to know as Varys the Eunuch could be just as much of an acting performance as any of his other identities. There are also people who speculate that Varys himself could be a Blackfire or have at least some Targaryen heritage due to the way that he shaves his head. Spoilers a little bit for Dunk and Egg if you want to miss them, skip ahead like 30 seconds or so. But Varys shaves his head, and he's described as shaving his head as bald as an egg, and Egg in Dunk and Egg shaves his head to hide the fact that he has Targaryen features, specifically his Targaryen hair. So, if Varys is secretly a Blackfire, he could be shaving his head for a similar reason. Now, this does make a lot of sense with all of his loyalties seemingly being going towards putting a Blackfire on the Iron Throne. That definitely does make sense, but it could also definitely be the case that the reason he shaves his head is because it makes it very easy to wear wigs and things like that if you're an actor. You shave your head so that you can put on different disguises more easily, and it might just be the case that it's useful for him playing all these different roles if his main role, the one that he's seen in the most, is him being bald. If you do actually believe his story, though, about how his balls were cut off and thrown into a fire and some voice started talking back, well, that would make some sense if he was a Blackfire, because then he would, in theory, have King's blood, and then therefore it would make sense that he would have been the one that was bought by this sorcerer and had part of him sacrificed. So, on that level, it does make some sense, and on another level, it could be that if someone got a hold of him who was anti Blackfire, he could have been gelded so that he can't pass on the line and make more Blackfires. If he was indeed a Blackfire, I would say it makes the most sense for him to be like, say, the brother of Sarah, which could be how he actually met Illyrio, which would make some sense then of why when Illyrio was talking about how they met, Tyrion called him out on an inconsistency with the story, saying that Varys was from Myr, when Illyrio was saying they were young boys together in Pentos. Maybe that's hinting at the idea that, okay, Illyrio's lying a little bit about how they met, and potentially that could be because if Sarah is a Blackfire, and he's sort of keeping that on the down low, and Varys was her brother, and both of them are then working together to honor her memory, well, that, it all seems to add up, at least on that level, if you want to speculate in that direction. I do tend to like the idea that Varys could potentially be a Blackfire, and it definitely could be revealed in a future book, or at least we could get more evidence of it in a future book. I don't know if we're ever going to get him coming out and saying it full on that, oh yeah, he's a Blackfire. And for that matter, I don't necessarily think we're ever going to get full confirmation as to whether or not young Griff is a Blackfire or the true Aegon Targaryen. We're mostly going to be left to speculate if I had to guess. And the last little quick theory that I can think of to bring up is the one that I mentioned very early on at the beginning of the video, that some people do speculate Varys is a mermaid because at one point he says, the big fish eat the little fish and I just keep paddling. But no, I don't think Varys is a mermaid. But if you do, let me know why. Make the case down there in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on any of the things that I've brought up here down in the comments, or if there's anything else about the mystery that is Varys the Spider that you feel like I should address. And yeah, as I said, just leave all your thoughts down there in the comments. Make sure you like and subscribe before you go. And thank you all very much to those of you who made it to the end of this. It was a long one, but there's a lot of weird mysteries to talk about with trying to get to the bottom of what's going on with Lord Varys. Be sure to check out something else on my channel and possibly even my second channel, which will be down in the description of this video. Thanks again for watching, and I'll be back with something else very soon.